I'm going to be reading from the Founder's Bible about a section called Here I Am, Unleash Your Children to Greatness. This is taken from 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 4. The Bible contains numerous examples of young people who accomplished much at a very young age. David was at the beginning of his teen years when he slew Goliath, and before that he had slain the lion and the bear, taken from 1 Samuel chapter 17. King Josiah was 8 years old when he became king. This is in 2 Kings 22:1. Samuel was just a lad when the Lord spoke to him and commissioned him for his first task of ministry in 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 through 14. Jesus was 12 when he confounded the doctors of the law in the temple in Jerusalem, taken from Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 47, and there are many other examples. Why are these types of youth accomplishments so rare today? The answer is expectations. Modern society does not expect youth to do much of significance until they are out of college and perhaps 25 years of age. With that expectation, we train accordingly. If we really believed that youth could do something significant before they were teens, we would train to that expectation instead, which is exactly what we did in previous generations. In 1783, America's very first purely American public school textbook was penned by founding father Noah Webster. It was his famous speller. For the next 150 years, it became the standard spelling textbook for American schools. In later years, it was known as Webster's Blueback Speller because of the distinctive color of the book. The title on its cover attests that it was an elementary spelling book, the beginning book from which American students learned to spell. Some of the spelling words taught in elementary schools for 150 years included contumelious, ichthology, and so on, and many other elementary spelling words that most Americans today have probably never seen. Why would Webster choose such difficult words? The textbook explained, it is useful to teach children the signification of words as soon as they can comprehend them, and the minds of children may well be employed in learning to spell and pronounce words whose signification is not within the reach of their capacities. For what they do not clearly comprehend at first, they will understand as their capacities are enlarged. He understood that students are capable of much more than what is often believed today. History consistently shows that if we raise expectations, students will rise to meet them. But if we lower expectations, they will also meet them. John Adams embraced the same philosophy. He spent much time separated from his family, sometimes because of his work in Congress and sometimes because he was overseas as a diplomat. During that time, Abigail assumed the full duties of running the family and raising the young children, and they corresponded regularly about both, especially the latter. For as John explained, the education of our children is never out of my mind. He reminded her, it should be your care, therefore, and mine, to elevate the minds of our children with an ambition to excel in every capacity, faculty, and virtue. If we suffer their minds to grovel and creep in infancy, they will grovel all their lives. He therefore affirmed, early youth is the time to learn the arts and sciences. The sooner, therefore, the practice begins, the more likely it will be to succeed. Your children have capacities equal to anything. There is a vigor in the understanding and a spirit and fire in the temper of every one of them which is capable of ascending the heights of art, science, trade, war, or politics. John and Abigail trained to these expectations and definitely succeeded. For example, when their young son John Quincy Adams was only 8 years old, he was already marching with the famous Massachusetts Minutemen in their various musket drills. At the age of 11, he accompanied his father as official secretary on his diplomatic mission to France. At 13, he left his father and traveled to Holland to attend Leiden University. At 14, he was made secretary and French interpreter for the American ambassador to Russia. At 15, he returned alone from St. Petersburg, Russia, to The Hague, an overland journey of 6 months. At 16, he was made the secretary to the American commissioners in France, who were negotiating the peace treaty with Great Britain to end the revolution. The policy of setting higher expectations for youth prevailed in America until the 1920s, when it was abandoned and replaced by a new approach introduced by secular progressives such as Francis Wayland Parker, John Dewey, William Harold Kilpatrick, Stanwood Cobb, and other like-minded leaders in educational pedagogy. They moved education away from student-centered learning to an educational philosophy that was oriented on social policy, thus abandoning the former emphasis on individualism and instead replacing it with concerns about thinking and acting as a group. It is in this period that the concept of adolescence began to take root and grow, but this is not the biblical model. Children were to become productive as soon as possible, to become men and women and be contributors. As explained by Rabbi Daniel Lapin, adolescence is a modern concept. The ever-growing void between childhood and maturity is what we call adolescence. However, the Lord's language, Hebrew, hinting perhaps at the deceptive and delusionary nature of the concept, possesses no word for adolescence. There is no word. It was the rituals and restraints of biblical faith that kept the fatal allure of adolescence at bay. In its absence, secularism encouraged the primacy of rights over obligations, thus helping to expand the boundaries of adolescence in each successive generation. American history for its first 3 centuries is filled with examples paralleling those from the Bible, repeatedly demonstrating that the average youth was able to accomplish much more than what we expect today. Regrettably, our society has come to accept mediocrity and adolescence as the norm, and youth achievement is now seen as something exceptional rather than ordinary. But consider the previous result. Signer of the Declaration George Reith was 3 when he began a study of the classics. Signer of the Declaration Benjamin Rush, the father of American medicine, was 14 when he graduated from Princeton. Signer of the Declaration Thomas Jefferson was 9 when he began the study of Latin, Greek, and French, and at 16 he entered William and Mary College, and it was common for American youth to be trilingual and enter college between the ages of 13 and 16. When signer of the Constitution William Livingston was 14, he was living as a missionary among the Mohawk Indians, one of the fiercest tribes in America, and at 18 he graduated from Yale at the top of his class. When U.S. President Andrew Jackson was 13, he was serving in the Continental Army during the American Revolution. At 14, he was taken by the British as a prisoner of war. At 16, he was a school teacher. When John Marrant, 1755 through 1791, was 13, he became the first black American to evangelize Native Americans successfully. When Maria Mitchell, 1818 through 1889, was 11, she was a teaching assistant and studying astronomy. At 12, she helped calculate the exact time of a forthcoming solar eclipse. At 17, she headed her own academy, training women in astronomy and science. Louisa May Alcott, 1832 through 1888, the author of classics such as Little Women and Little Men, was writing poetry at the age of 8. At 13, she wrote a famous poem. At 16, a book. At 18, a novel. At 19, her stories were being published across the country. When William Buffalo Bill Cody, 1846 through 1917, was 9, he was a cattle driver at 11. He was a legendary Indian fighter at 12, a trapper and woodsman at 13, a Pony Express rider at 15. He was writing military dispatches at 16. He was a guide and scout for the military, where he became a Medal of Honor winner. When Charlie Miller, 1850 through 1955, was 8, he was a Bronco buster. At 11, he was a Pony Express rider, with each of his trips being a 10-day ride at breakneck speed, covering some 1,800 miles between St. Joseph, Missouri, and San Francisco, California, fighting hardships, dangers, storms, Indians, and outlaws all along the way. When John Clem, 1851 through 1937, was 12, he was a soldier in the Battle of Chickamauga in the Civil War. He was promoted by General Rosecrans to the rank of sergeant for his exploits on the field, and General Thomas then promoted him to the rank of lieutenant. When the famous sharpshooter Annie Oakley, 1860 through 1926, was 9, she was already earning a living for her family by her skills with a gun. There are countless similar examples affirming that youth are capable of great things at an early age. It is time to reject the societal restraints of low expectations produced by secular progressive education, and instead encourage youth to hear from God at an early age, as Samuel did, and then begin performing great exploits and achievements.